welcome to this video documentary covering the career of drag racer Kenny Vogt. Kenny's story begins in 1959.
So the year's 1959. I'm 15 years old. My parents moved from my childhood home in Huntington Woods, Michigan, which is only about 3 miles from 10 Mile and Woodward Avenue. Woodward Avenue turned into being one of the drag race street capital of the country. They moved from near 10 Mile and Woodward to 15 Mile and Telegraph, which is only about 3 miles from Woodward. This is significant because as we head into the 60s, the Woodward street racing was really set the stage for all the high performance cars. So it was 1959, and I was happy out there, but now we moved to early September of 1960. And my dad was a product engineer at Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan. And he said to me, they're having a drag race at Detroit Dragway. I'd never been to a drag race. I'd never really heard of Detroit Dragway. I was excited because I'm going to get my license in about 3 weeks. I would turn 16 September 24th. So I said, sure. So he brought these tickets home, and we go down to Detroit Dragway, and wow, all these cars and the engine noises, the sounds of the high performance stuff of the day. I'd never seen all this. You know, the announcer in the tower talking, giving the times, and the cars doing burnouts and pulling up the line. And my dad knew a bunch of the drivers because they were Ford Motor Company guys in the Ford car. And I look over the drag strip, and there's Royal Pontiac going down the drag strip, and of course they were in Royal Oak, Michigan, off of Woodward, basically between 10 and 15 Mile. So, you know, see those cars that were local. And I thought, this is awesome, this thing's going on. I mean, this happens every weekend. What is this? I can't wait, you know, to get my license. So we go home, and I find out that the event that I was at was the 1960 Nationals, held at Detroit Dragway. And Royal Pontiac, I think, won top stock, or whatever the top stock class of the day was. Well, I get my license 3 weeks later, and my mother had a Galaxy with a 3-speed on the column shift, and I couldn't wait to get to Woodward because it was only like 3 miles over to Woodward. Woodward was the main artery out of Detroit, and its border for the city of Detroit was 8 Mile Woodward. Well, the drive-in started at about 10 Mile in Woodward and went up to the equivalent of 18 Mile Woodward. Now, Woodward was a 8-lane boulevard in its day. So it was with most of the way there was a traffic light every mile. So this was perfect for drag racing because you'd pull up to the light, you'd have a guy next to you, you'd rev your engines, and the light would turn green, and you'd launch. And there wasn't a lot of traffic in those days. Sunday afternoons was the big day out. And of course there were drive-ins that we could go to. The Big Boy, Mavericks, Steak and Shake, Totem Pole, and at the northern end, Ted's Drive-In. And these were drive-ins where you had car op service, you would order on the speaker, and they'd bring it out, and we'd just go and sit there and talk. And then at 13 in Woodward was a shopping center called Northwood Shopping Center. And late at night, everybody with the cars would go up to Northwood, and we'd line up facing out on Woodward and raise the hoods, and we just talked car shop stuff. Well, after, with my mother's car, I decided, well, I got to get a car of my own. So I had saved some money, and I bought a white 1957 Ford hardtop, no post. It was so cool. And I really enjoyed taking that car out there. Well, one Saturday afternoon, my father said to me, I'm going over to this friend of mine's place, Andy Houghton's in Dearborn. He had this shop called Dearborn Steel Tubing. So I'm going along as the kid, the dads, Andy and my dad were talking. And they said, we got to get Kenny an engine for that car. I said, what? What do you mean? It's got an engine. Oh no, we're talking about a 390, I think 375 horse, because the year is 1961. And before I know it, we're down at that shop, and his shop supervisor, Jim Hammer Mason, my dad got an engine set over to Andy, Hammer put the engine in, and I would take that out now on Woodward to these drive-ins. And of course, here's this 1961 engine in this 57 Ford, nobody's suspecting. So when we pull up to a light, or we call out other cars to go race, they're not really racing a 57 Ford. So we got a reputation, you know, that white 57 Ford.
Now, Ken, I was wondering what kind of transmission you used in the 57?
We used a 3-speed manual transmission with the floor shifter.
All my friends kept saying, you got to take that car down to Detroit Dragway. They raced on Sunday afternoons. And I couldn't do anything down there. And, sure you can. You're beating all these cars on the street. Take it down. So I said, all right, I took it down. I didn't have any cutouts, closed exhaust. I had street tires, and of course it was a disaster. You know, burned the tires, lost the race it was in, so come back, well, nuts to this. So in 1962, I got a summer job with Dearborn Steel Tubing, because my dad was friends with Andy Houghton. Said, well, we'll put him to work here in the shop. So I met all these older guys. One guy I got the biggest kick out of, his name, he lived in Dearborn. He had a 1961 all-black Starliner he called Rag Nasty. His name was Jack Fouché, and his sidekick was Don Height, and they took me under their wing in the shop. And what we did in the shop was we assembled 4 to come out with an aftermarket that could be ordered to the dealership of 3 2-barrel intake manifolds. We didn't dare call them tri-power. That was a GM term, but that's what it was. It was Ford tri-power, but it was 3 tubes. So Andy Houghton and Dearborn Steel Tubing had the contract to prepare these. And what would happen is the raw intake manifold would come in from wherever it was cast, and we would degrease it, deburr it for all the ports, and then we would finish it off by putting on the carburation and all the linkage, and we had a regular assembly line. And this was my job with about 12 other guys. We would do this. And I got paid minimum wage of the day, which was $1.25 an hour. And of course, you're laughing, but of course we would go over to McDonald's, which is a new place that opened, McDonald's, a few years earlier, and there was one there on Michigan Avenue, not far from the shop. And of course, I'll never forget, I'd always get like 2 hamburgers, because I didn't want to spend an extra nickel for cheese, French fries, and I wasn't going to get an expensive shake and a Coke. And I think it came to like just over 52 cents or something like that. Wow. So that was like lunch. Yeah. So I get a paycheck, 40 hours times $1.25, whatever that is, 50 something after tax. And I had 50 bucks in my pocket, and this was awesome. Of course, you didn't mind paying $19.9 or a little over for gasoline, whatever it was in those days. So that was, and these were older guys that kind of took me under their wing. I was very grateful to them. And Hammer was the shop manager, or supervisor, I should say, as they called it in those days. And again, the same story all over. My dad, Andy says to my dad, we got to get Kenny a 406, 405, which was the 1962 Ford high-performance engine. We got to get Kenny an engine for the car for 62. And we got to put him, he's going down the drag strip, we got to have him put Dearborn steel tubing on the side. Someone, okay, this is great. I'll take it off the street, you know, to take it down to the track, because I couldn't take a streetcar to the track and do any good. I found that out in 61. So kind of a girlfriend, if you will, that I had at the time, name was Carol Smith. She was a couple years older than me. We spent an afternoon at, there's a little park at 13 in Woodward, and we decided to letter the car. Well, I didn't want to paint the lettering on, because I'd have to take it off to sell the car and probably have to repaint the car. So I got this 17, 18-year-old bright idea. Let's put electrical tape and make the lettering. So she said, well, I can do that. So it took all day, and she cut black electrical tape, as you can see in the picture, and she did a beautiful job, and lettered Dearborn steel tubing. Well, so that was really the start then of taking the car down to the drag strip, and we were in B gas class, and I'd taken it off the street altogether. I just had bought a 54 Ford Flathead to drive to work, you know, work the rest of the summer, and it was off the street. And we started having success in B gas class. Actually quite a bit, as you can see by the trophies in the pictures. So that was very exciting. Campaigned that car throughout 1962. 1962, we put the 4-speed in it, I believe. In 63, of course, we continued. In 64, we continued with that.
There were people that separated themselves from the group back then as far as efficiency of shifting a 4-speed car. And you were telling me a story of how you got your on-the-job kind of training, or the training on how to be a 4-speed shifter.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. We have to go back to when I worked in 1962, the summer, for Dearborn Steel Tubing. Dearborn Steel Tubing was kind of a fabricating prototype shop. We did work on cars, and Hammer Mason, nicknamed Hammer because he always had the lead foot, as we used to call it. I didn't really know how to power shift a car, so he said, Kenny, I'm going to teach you. And he had like a 54 Mercury with a 406 in it. And Dearborn Steel Tubing was located off of Michigan Avenue in Dearborn, and there was an alley behind the place. And Hammer taught me how to power shift. And power shift, of course, means you keep your foot to the floor on the gas, and you operate the clutch with your left foot and shift the gears, you know, with your right hand. Also, you didn't ever lift your foot, which was the tendency, because that's the way you drove streetcars. You would lift your foot. So it took me a while to get the knack of that. And of course, in the alley, there's pebbles and gravel. So this car's fishtailing all over the place, going up and down the alley. And we do this after work. And I think even a weekend when I was in there, because they'd be working on stuff in the shop. And I'd come over and he'd teach me. So I really credit Hammer with teaching me how to power shift the car. I think I had a pretty good reputation, because I was light then. I only weighed like 120 pounds. So I'd be holding the car, or the steering wheel, and I'd be forward, and then I would just, with all my might, I'd move my body back as well as my arm back to shift the car, to really yank, almost like try and yank that 4-speed lever right out of the floor. That's what I tried to do. And because Hammer done such a good job, I was fearless by keeping my foot down. And, you know, of course we had the proper clutch in the car so it wouldn't blow up and things of that nature, because you can't just do that with like a regular passenger car. You might blow the thing apart. But I want to add one more thing. When I was kind of street racing, another fellow, his name's Stan Sackinen. He worked for Stark Hickey Ford on Woodward. Nice guy. Unfortunately, he died in a car accident on the street. But he taught me how to bring the car off the starting. In other words, Hammer in the gravel, the car's moving all over, you know, in the alley, but on power shift. But we never really covered, you know, sidestepping the clutch and bringing it off the starting line. So Stan taught me how to do that. We'd just be out on the street racing type situation in like a car he'd get from the dealership, not necessarily even my car. But he just taught me like the staging, you know, how to be very careful with how you do that. You know, let the car roll very gently up the line, not bring it up quickly and stop, because you could overstage. So he taught me that, as well as how to get the coordination for bringing the RPMs up on the tachometer as you are getting ready to launch. And of course we had flagmen in those early days. You know, this is before the Christmas tree.
In 1963, started out racing it with Dearborn steel tubing, but this time we put a 427 engine in it and continued with that engine for the full year.
Again at Detroit Dragway, in rolls this beautiful gold and black, immaculate paint job, Bob Ford on the side, 57 Ford like I had, with the identical engine that I had. I'd never seen this car, and they were a big production, you know. They had a super stock car they ran, Galaxy, and this was like a 57. He's in my class, we're in B gas. And I never knew a guys. Well, sure enough, as it would end up, the final trophy run for the class was Jerry Harvey at the wheel of the Bob Ford 57 Ford, and myself at the wheel of the Dearborn Steel Tubing Company 57 Ford. And I ended up beating him. And then one of the nicest things that's ever happened to me in drag racing, Jerry Harvey and his father, Paul Harvey, who was co-owner, general manager at the time at Bob Ford, walked over, and my dad was with me in the pits, congratulated us on that win. The two dads hit it off, Jerry and I hit it off, and before I know it, Paul Harvey's saying, "We got to get Bob Ford on the side of that car." And I said, "Well, I've got Dearborn Steel." "Well, we can letter it up, paint it. You can use this at the dealership to work on the car." Well, of course, this is a big thing for a kid, you know, to have this. So, sure enough, next week, I'm down there, you know, taking Dearborn Steel off, repainting the car, lettering it up, as you can see in the picture, with Bob Ford on the side. And then we raced that car. Well, I always said, well, what if it's the two of us every week racing? Well, Paul thought that was a great idea, all Ford final. He said, plus, you know, you guys go here, like I'd go to Onondaga Dragway, Ubly Dragway. Jerry might go south, you know, so we weren't always at the same track. So that made sense. And I think we might have raced one other time, which I was fortunate enough to beat him again. Never ended up beating me. But that's kind of the story of how I got hooked up with Bob Ford and the 57 Ford.
In addition to the people locally that you were involved with that influenced you, were you aware of the other top flight kind of racers that were out there, the drag racers? Was there like a hero for you, somebody that you wanted to emulate, or you would hope that you could maybe even race somebody someday in the future?
Well, that's an interesting question. All those guys like Dick Brannon, Don Nicholson, you know, Dave Strickler, they were all my heroes. But of course, I didn't want to get anywhere near racing those guys. So I had this 57 Ford, and I was comfortable just winning these trophies, a little bit of bond money they pay in those days. And remember, I was a kid, you know. In 1964, which was my last year with the 57 Ford, you know, I was 20 years old. So, you know, this was just exciting to be able to go to these local drag strips with friends and race and bring home a trophy, you know. And my dad, I'll never forget, the home lived in Bloomfield Township. In the family room, he'd put up a shelf all the way around. So I'd bring home these trophies, and up they'd go on the shelf. Up to, you know, he had a high ceiling in the room. And so that was kind of impressive that his friends would come over, my friends would come over, and they'd see all these trophies. Wow, you know.
Yeah. Kenny, I was wondering what the story was behind the big cutout wheel wells on the 57.
Well, with the 57 Ford, in order to get the wider slicks in, because we could run slicks in B gas class, and then later B modified production, they wouldn't fit under the conventional factory wheel well. So we just radiused them with a saw, and you can see that in the picture, how, you know, in that way we never gave much thought. I thought it was kind of neat looking because early drag racers kind of emulated like dirt oval track cars. You know, they kind of looked like those cars. And outside of Detroit, there was Flat Rock Motor Speedway, which is a dirt track that was very popular, raced every Saturday night. And all those cars had radiused wheel wells. So it was kind of like the thing to do, but never thought anything of it. We were more concerned with how fast we went and who we beat. And it was kind of like cool to have grease and smudges. Now they gave out at the Nationals mostly, but at some tracks, like the Best Dressed Crew Award. But if you could see what, like from the 60 or 61 Nationals, then there's some footage on what the Best Dressed Crew had. They basically had t-shirts.
Right.
So we weren't as concerned. We wanted the car lighter because that was cool. And with the dealership, that was cooler. But, you know, we were more concerned with winning. So, and I kind of regret not having a nicer looking car. But with a lot of the nice cars, if we saw a nice car roll in, they didn't seem to run as well as the cars that just kind of, you know, look kind of rough. I had crew, just friends of the day, nobody that was regular. Just to go down to the drag strip.
How would you get there? Did you use a trailer? Was it a tow bar?
Tow bar. Just towed the car down. Again, we ran B modified production, before that B gas.
Did you use tow hubs on the back and put regular tires on it? Did you have to do that kind of stuff or no?
Yes, we would switch to the slicks once we were at the track. Well, there were some memorable races that I had. One of them was, we ran in B gas, and after you win your class, they had what was called Street Eliminator, which took, I forget all the gas classes off, and they would race them. There was no handicap in those days, so if you were an A gas car, you had an advantage over a B gas car. Well, one of my memories was there were two guys, Detroit guys, called Ellis and Prock. Neil Pappy Ellis and Tom Prock, and they were Chevy guys, and they raced in C gas. And as I remember, the car was not lettered. It was a 55 or possibly 6, I want to say, Chevrolet with whatever the engine is that qualified in the day. And I remember, because they were well thought of in Detroit, and I remember coming up against them, I think Ellis drove and Tom worked the engines. And I didn't really know these men, but I ended up beating him because I had a B gas car, in fairness to their C gas car, but I ended up beating him, and that was a very prideful moment to me because they were well thought of guys. And of course, for those that might not know the story, Tom's son, I believe, Jimmy, is well known in the sport of drag racing, and every time I see him on TV, it brings back the memories of me racing the Ellison Proc C gas car.
Yeah.
So that was a moment. And then one other moment I had, I mentioned how we beat Jerry Harvey with the beautiful Bob Ford equipped, comparably equipped 57 Ford. There was one other guy that showed up by the name of, with a 57 Ford, not lettered, I think it was brown and white two-tone. Had the same engine in it I was, in the same class. And I only raced him once in Detroit at the finals, and I beat that car. And that was, the two guys that had that car were Bill Holbrook and Len Richter. Well, they need no introduction. And I ended up beating them at Detroit Dragway. And that was another big moment in my life, even though, because I knew they worked at Ford. Len was a test track driver at Ford, and Bill Humphreys was involved with either the build up of the cars or something, I think, involving the test track. Yeah. Little did I know that within a year we'd be best friends, and as the story will continue, I ended up in 1965 getting Len Richter's Thunderbolt. God bless my dad. As a kid growing up, teenager, I had typical type little minor conflicts. Well, after he took me to what I didn't know at the time, but was the 60 Nationals of Detroit, I said, I got to do this stuff. Well, it bonded us because he loved that his son was involved in this, because my dad was in engineering at Ford Motor Company in the engine engineering building next to Greenfield Village Henry Ford Museum off of Oakwood. And so he was all prideful with, you know, his son's racing and all this. And of course, you know, we were able to get some parts out of there that his bosses were, you know, had moved up in the company, and they would authorize things because when Tiny Lund won the Daytona 500. I forget the year, was it 63? Everybody at Ford was all gung-ho high performance because this had been dominated by General Motors, Pontiac, and Chevrolet. Of course, it was just a little before the Chrysler era, and they were all excited over there. So anything to make a car go faster that was a race car, well, just get him that engine, get him that part. Mm-hmm. You know, he's out there beating these other makes. That's what we want. So it was kind of in the right spot at the right time. Well, my dad would come down to the track, and he'd stay with the in the pit most of the time to keep an eye on stuff. He'd make the sandwiches, because in those days, if you kept winning round after round, you might not get out of there till midnight, 1 in the morning, you know, so you're hungry. And he was very instrumental in introducing me to people and getting engines and parts and things of that nature. So I really credit him with all that.
You put a name on the trunk lid, which I find very interesting.
Okay.
And tell us about that.
Well, I'm not... back on the street racing days, when we put the 61 390 375 engine in, I had these signs made up. So when we went through the drive-in, my buddy, he would hold up, Chevys don't go, Corvettes don't go, Dodges don't go, you know, and bring it out, and they think they were racing a 57 Ford until we got the reputation. Well, I also had a sign, Ford's Forever, because everybody, oh, boo, this, and we flashed the sign, you know. So I ended up putting this across the trunk deck of, first with Carroll in electrical tape, black electrical tape in 1962, and then it carried it over with Bob Ford and the whole lettering job across the trunk deck in 63 and 64. And then I never used it again.
Was there ever a non-Ford in those early years with your parents, with yourself? Was there a non-Ford ever came in?
You want my dad to lose his job?
The statute has expired.
Are you kidding? I didn't buy a make other than a Ford until after he passed away. You did. Then I did. Then I wanted experience. So for street cars, I've had Chargers and, you know, Mercedes and you know, a Chrysler 300 C, I think, with a Hemi, you know, on the street. But no, it was all Ford family. You know, we didn't dare go beyond that, you know, because it was that division.
Now, of course, that era, you know, you're watching Chevrolets, the 11 Chevrolets and 409s out there. You're watching 413s like we have here in the shop. And were you ever curious enough to say, gee, maybe I'd like to try driving one of those cars?
Actually, no. Huh? It was more like, gee, I want to beat that car.
Cool.
You know, that is such a cool car. I want to beat it.
Well, we've been seeing some really great photographs of the 57, and I was wondering who was behind the camera.
Actually, it was like whoever, if I had a couple buddies that went down, one of them would have a camera, he might take it.
That's good.
You know, I was too busy racing, working on the car. We did not give a lot of thought back in those days to documenting stuff. That's why those early days, there isn't a lot. The racing gas of the day was, of course, at the pumps on the street. We had Sunoco 260, which was their high-octane fuel, and also Gulf Crest, which was their top-of-the-line high-octane fuel. I think it was in the low 90s.
And which one did you use? Did you make a choice?
Whichever was cheapest.
All right. Yeah.
We were on a budget in those days. They both ran comparable performance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, we see a number on a car. All race cars have numbers on them.
Right.
And of course, you have a number that you carried through your career, but it begins right there with the 57 car. And of course, it is the number
57.
Yeah. So does it mean because it's a 57 car?
It had some meaning. I picked that number initially, and then we got to use it even with NHRA until they started assigning at the Nationals. When I was like 14 years old, I used to race horses in barrel bending, it's called. There's 8 barrels placed 25 feet apart. You have a quarter horse, and you're clocked on a time. Then you weave in and out and back across the finish line with that. And I raced in the Gaylord County Fair in 1957, and I was assigned a number to wear on my back, like a rodeo number that they wear. They pin them, you know, with a safety pin to your back of your shirt, and it was 57. Well, I picked the number, had to pick a number for the 57 Ford, and of course I remembered this from years earlier with the rodeo barrel bending event, and it being a 57 Ford, I selected 57. And I decided to put the 57 in a blue circle that was on the back quarter panel of the car, because all the stock cars of the day, both dirt track and on the big oval, they all had ovals with their number in them. So that's how I started using the number 57. So after racing the car in Canada, at Grand Bend, Dragway, at Ubley, Onondaga, Martin Dragway, these are Michigan area tracks. They kept saying, you got to take the car to the Nationals. Well, I can't go to the Nationals. Well, sure enough, go to the Nationals in 1964. I made it all the way to the finals in what was called B modified production. And I got beat by a Corvette, I think you have the video, on the final run.
Okay, here we are at the 1964 NHRA Nationals, and that's Kenny Vogt with his Bob Ford sponsored 57 Ford. Now this is the final run in B modified production, and the Corvette will get the win over Kenny Vogt's 427 powered 57 Ford. What happened on that run? Do you remember? Take us through the run.
I remember, but I don't want to tell you.
Oh, you have to.
I had a big car. It was heavy against the Corvette, so he made me look bad off the starting line.
Okay.
Now,
as a driver back then, what emphasis was there on the starting line technique for you? Was that something that...
It was very important, but because within the class there was such a range of cars, unlike today where the times are all so narrow, the driver reaction time is everything. While our driver reaction time was important there, we could oftentimes run a weaker car down, if you will. We could catch them. So while it was important as you got closer to the trophy run, it wasn't, it's always important to start, of course.
Well, that ends our first episode of the Kenny Vogt drag racing story, in which we featured Kenny's 1957 Ford Gasser. Our next episode will feature Kenny and the Ford Thunderbolt he raced during the 1965 drag racing season. Now, Kenny has more stories about his T-Bolt days, and I'm sure you will enjoy hearing them.